Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues, and in particular Bible, theology, and political issues in relationship to those issues. Today is a little bit of a rabid ramblings. Just a reminder, a rambling is more me kind of thinking off the top of my head and not necessarily the most researched thing in the world. So you're more than, if I say something that's factually incorrect, you're more than welcome to correct me in the comments. I'm more than open to that. But today this video was kind of kicked off. I've been thinking a lot about this issue, and then Apologists dropped a video yesterday in regards to him dealing with a certain apologist that appeared on a show, a book that they had written, that, you know, and in particular this book is written to deal with the idea that the disciples had, you know, hallucinated the entire resurrection story. And a lot of, he was going after them because Apologia is like, dude, that's not the argument that we're making, because the guy who is the apologist, and you can look up the video, I'll link it up above my head, but the guy that was the apologist was sitting there talking about how there's no way that this could be an hallucination, an experience like that where they were making stuff up or seeing a vision or whatever. 500 people wouldn't do that. The problem is me and Apologia aren't claiming that it took 500 people to see some sort of vision and it was, you know, hallucinogenic kind of thing. We're saying that it only takes two people, one of the disciples. This is where I differ from Apologia. Apologia says maybe Peter and Paul are all that's necessary. I say any one of the disciples seeing a vision like this and then making it up that Peter saw it or whatever. And then Paul on the road to Damascus has a vision, which he openly admits in later parts of the account of Acts that he wasn't sure whether he was seeing something in the body or out of the body. He openly admits that in his letters too. So he pretty much says he just had a vision of Jesus, not necessarily whether or not he actually saw Jesus himself or not, or verified that. But the contention from us as critics and skeptics is it doesn't take those 500 supposed people to see a hallucinogenic experience of Jesus. All you really need to have two people that really believe that and spread the story, and then everybody else, you know, people are going to do what they want to do because people believe what they want to believe because they want to believe it. And so it's like you can get that going, and it doesn't take much to get Christianity really to go. And, you know, from my perspective, why is Christianity so big? And it's the same reason why a lot of religions get big. Number one, you have a unique set of beliefs that seems to be different and offers a lot of people a little bit different hope. And like it or not, Christianity is a different kind of take on Judaism. And so it's, you know, it comes out of that mindset. And then you have, you know, the second thing is usually some political leader or political powerhouse makes it their state religion and pushes it. And Christianity checks off both those boxes for me from a historical standpoint. Now, the thing I want to deal with today, and I say all that, is because Apologia gets up to a point in his video and basically says, I'm not trying to convince Christians that their ideas are false in this video. He says, what this is, and I think it's like 48 minutes long. He says, this is a video to express my frustration that despite the fact that many of these scholars and many of us atheists and many of us, you know, skeptics deal with your questions and offer up our own objections to your arguments, you continue to use the same tired arguments that have been proven false, sometimes even by your own Christian scholarship, and yet you continue to use them. And in this particular case, it was the mischaracterization thing. that the guy who was talking about the hallucinogenic response that the disciples had was totally focused on whether all of them could have had this hallucination. And our point is, no, you only need about 1, 2, maybe 3 people to have a vision of the risen Jesus that's completely in their head. And then they propagate that story, and bam, you can have this story. It doesn't take much to get a rumor going, especially if it's a rumor that everybody wants to hear. I mean, this is why I think Jesus was a historical figure, because if you have a beloved leader who, was a good teacher, maybe Matthew is correct that he taught, with authority and not as the scribes, and you have him build up a following, but the religious leaders of the time don't like what he's having to say. They think some of the stuff that he's saying, like on the Sabbath or whatever, is heretical or, just bad doctrine. And they finally get tired of it and they have him killed. Maybe they did have him killed by the Romans. Don't know. Then you have a bunch of followers afterwards that think this is wrong and that this was unjust. And so they write down his teachings. And then somebody comes along and says, well, what about this Jesus guy? What was the story? And then you have somebody like Mark, who writes the story of Jesus's life, putting the teachings in there in the appropriate places. But, the story seems kind of dull. It's just a teacher. And so they add a few things in. And then the next guy picks up that story and adds some more stuff in. It's a building legend. I think all legends have a kernel of truth to them. Even Paul Bunyan, there was probably some damn lumberjack out there that was really good. And everybody said, yeah, he did this. And then the story got bigger and bigger. Now, I want to get back to topic. Apologists need to stop using the same bullshit arguments that have been debunked and sufficiently debunked that many Christians admit that they're wrong. This was my frustration as a believer who was struggling with my faith, is I'm going to these apologists trying to get some sort of answers. And then I would follow up on their claims and realize they were completely and utterly full of crap, that these arguments had been debunked. The worst perpetrators by far are creationists. One of my favorites, just as an example, I'm going to give a few examples, but trust me, there's a legion of these falsehoods or misunderstandings of what skeptics are saying out there. But one of the great examples is it's just a theory. Yeah, but you're confusing the scientific definition of theory and the colloquial one, the more commonly held definition of a theory, which is it's a guess. This is one case where I think the scientists could have done a better job and said, if you use the word theory, people are going to get confused with how it's commonly used. And they really should have picked a different word, but they didn't. But those are two very different definitions. One is an educated guess, and the other one is far more than a guess. It is a body of evidence that has been placed together to prove, that gives all this evidence and facts that this is how this thing works until something comes along that can disprove it. And right now, this is the best explanation scientifically that we have of how this works. And it's, packed full of information and facts and studies and things like that verify that theory. That's the way theory is used in science. Now, I have lost track of the number of apologists that I've heard use this word. Somebody has corrected them on it, and they still keep going and using it. That's dishonest. When you know how one thing is used, and then, you ignore that and continue to make your argument the other way, that's dishonest. You have to stop at that point in your argument and say, okay, well, if that's the case, if that's the scientific definition of theory, then I've got to attack that. Is this a body of evidence? And in order to do that, you're going to have to actually read the evidence. And this became my problem. That's one of my favorites, and it's the easiest one to battle. But if you're an apologist and you're still using that argument, you're being dishonest. You have now been reprimanded for it again. Quit using the colloquial definition of theory in place of the scientific definition of theory. And if you keep doing that, you're just wrong. Okay, I'm going to stop listening to you at that point because you obviously haven't done your homework. I feel the same every time I hear a creationist talk about stuff, and they can't get straight. Cosmology is not the same as evolution. Abiogenesis is not the same as evolution. If you can't tell the difference between abiogenesis, evolution, and cosmology, you haven't done the basics to understanding what these people's work is all about. And quit making up stuff. Quit making up terms like evolutionism and stuff like that. You're making stuff up. I get tired. I used to get tired. I'd read and, well, these are questions that atheists can't answer. And that still appears on YouTube. Okay. Every once in a while, one of these apologists will come up with a video. This is stuff they can't answer. And then a legion of atheist YouTubers will answer the question, and then you won't pull the video. You'll still keep it up there. It's like, dude, you've just had 20, 30, 40 atheist YouTubers answer all these questions, and sometimes very scientifically with good research, and you're still running your video. Well, the atheists can't answer these questions. They just did. Be honest enough about it and be truthful enough about it to pull your video and say, and then start dealing with the answers that you were given. That would be an honest apologist. But this is the frustration I had, because I would read apologists and I would start to do research and go down whatever rabbit hole they were going down. And I suddenly realized they had no evidence and that what they were saying was false or they were mischaracterization. The most common things I saw with apologists that they really need to correct is the big one is straw man. They will create a complete fabrication of what skeptics are saying, make it not what the skeptics are saying at all, and then attack the straw man. It was incredibly common. If you want to impress me as apologist, listen to the skeptics and then steel man their argument and attack that. I dare you. I haven't seen an apologist do it yet. Even the best ones, like Inspired Philosophy, tries, but he doesn't really steel man. He always leaves a small weakness here or there that he doesn't steel man, and then he attacks that small weakness that he perceives. And it's not that he's dishonest. It's just, I think he has a blind spot when it comes to his faith, that he's not going to give up his faith. So no matter what skeptics say, he's going to try to find a way to get past it. And he tries to come up with stuff that's, intellectually good. And he's just one example. I'm rambling today, okay? I get comments all the time. Why don't you look at this person? Why don't you look at this person? I'm going to tell you something. I don't always do that. And I'm going to tell you why, because I've already been down that road. I think people seem to forget that I was a Christian for 20 years, and I spent 5 years, two and a half years struggling with my faith, and two and a half being in the pulpit pretending to be a Christian because out of necessity, because I'm like, I don't know what the fuck to do with my life. It's like people don't get that. Okay, I read a lot of these people. I went and got the best books that apologists had, which I no longer have because to me they were useless. My favorite is the Cold Case Detective. I can't even remember his name right now. But when I listen to him talk about eyewitness testimony, I'm thinking to myself, dude, you want to separate eyewitnesses at a crime scene within minutes so they don't collude their testimony. And yet somehow you believe 20, 25, 30 years of oral tradition didn't suffer from that collusion? The guy literally denies everything he learns as a crime scene investigator in order to make his case. He knows what he would do in a crime scene, and he literally does the opposite. He comes up with some convoluted reason to do so, and it drives me nuts. I see this happen all the time with atheists who convert back to Christianity, quote unquote. I got a comment this week. I'll deal with it on Friday. But I see that all the time. It's like, wait a minute. You know all this stuff is true, but now you want an exception to the rule. And a large part of what that apologist does is special pleading. He wants this supposed eyewitness testimony of the Gospels to be treated in a different light than what he would do at a crime scene. And that's just wrong. But they'll do it anyway. And it's this kind of apologetics where you're being dishonest or you're plain deliberately not understanding what the skeptics are saying that is garbage. And that's what me and Apologia and a lot of the rest of us are just frustrated with, is because we tell you what our argument, and we try to be as plain as we possibly can. And what do? You either straw man it, you ignore it, or you keep using the same arguments that are tired and old. The problem with Apologia's video with this guy is he completely misunderstood what the argument is saying about, the disciples had, hallucinated genetic experiences. They couldn't see it. They were seeing it in their head, which is quite common. He even, Apologia in that video goes to point out that memories are not hard and fast. Okay, what you remember about something is very subjective at times. Okay, and that creates a lot of problems. We tend to romanticize, for instance, stuff that we feel was good, and we tend to, demonize things we didn't like. Okay, we tend to look at people that we think wronged us. I have to be very careful with that. I've had a lot of people in 20 years of ministry that wronged me, and I have to be very careful not to characterize them as worse than they really are, without some good evidence. And you have to step back, but you also tendency to take some good things that a person does, you have some good experiences with somebody, and you tend to make those experiences even better than what they really were. Okay, so memories are they're emotions, okay, more than they are facts. And that's the real problem with apologetics, is because there's an emotional attachment to a belief system. I know, because I used to be emotionally attached to a belief system. My problem with apologetics, and my continued problem with it, is quit making videos of 10 things it can't answer. Have the atheist answer it and then keep your video up. They did answer it. You need to now go and deal with the answers, because otherwise you're just being dishonest. Okay. Don't sit there and say they can't answer it when they've answered it. Okay. I've lost track of the videos that apologists put out and say, oh, this is an airtight case for God. I've literally watched, there's one guy that puts out a video series of, the absolute proof for God. And I have seen now 3, 4, maybe atheist YouTubers shred it point by point, okay, over the years. And I'm going to be blunt. I think a couple of them said, I can make a career out of debunking your video series, okay, alone. And they're right. Dude, no, quit speaking confidently of something you don't have assurance of. I think another one that gets me is when apologists speak so confidently of stuff that is obviously a little bit questionable. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is a good one, because we don't have a resurrection story with the first Gospel of Mark. It doesn't show up until Luke and Matthew. And Matthew is kind of very accusatory about it. He's like, yeah, he rose from the dead and then ascended into heaven. And that's it. Luke goes into great detail in Luke and Acts to embellish that story. That's why I think Luke was after Matthew, and I think they all knew about each other. John is way after all three of them, and boy, Jesus just grows superpowers, and all kinds of stories come out of the woodwork. This has every aspect of a growing legend. It has every aspect of the fact that none of the gospel writers identify themselves, so we don't even know who they were written by. You can't make a claim that these were all eyewitnesses of Christ if you don't even know who the witnesses are. It's purely church tradition that says all these things were written this way. Well, yeah, but tradition says, here, there, and everywhere that Mark wrote this gospel. Well, that's great. It's great that was an early tradition, but it's still just an early tradition. I don't have Mark saying, I wrote this. I don't have Matthew going, yeah, and this was written by Matthew, the disciple of Jesus Christ, at the bottom. Okay, and then we just still have to confirm that the signature is authentic. We do all this stuff in real life, But we don't give this kind of cursory examination of the Gospels. We just accept them. And that's the biggest thing you apologists need to do. Quit accepting that what you're saying is just straight up true. When you come out with doctrinal statements, creationists, once again, the greatest example of this, if you work for this company, you need to understand that no matter what you discover, it has to line up with the Bible. Even if it doesn't line up with the Bible. If it doesn't line up with the Bible, it must be wrong. When you make that kind of, upfront assumption and upfront designation, you've already indicated your bias. And anything I'm going to hear from you is just not going to be listened to. I have lost track on this channel over this last year of how many times you need to watch this video to give your faith back, or dude, I've already heard this stuff. Okay, I've looked at this stuff. I spent 3 years agonizing over this, reading books and looking, reading both the apologists and the response by the critics. And like it or not, the critics had a valid point. Your evidence is shaky. It's really, really shaky. And a lot of it is conjecture. And once I realized that, I said, there really isn't any good proof of the existence of God. And there certainly really isn't any proof that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and that he rose from the dead. Yeah, I think that's a made-up story. Just as made up as the phoenix, just as made up as, Odin wandering the earth. There's no good proof for it. It's just stories that people made up to explain what was around them. And I get it. There's an emotional attachment to this thing called faith, and it's hard to get rid of because I really think it's an addiction. And that's why I do what I do. I'm trying to get you over your addiction to religion. Sorry, they've done studies, the areas of pleasure that are stimulated by your religion are the same ones for alcohol, drugs, and sex. Like it or not, when you have those addictive properties, it stimulates the same areas of your brain and then starts other parts of your brain get to engaged with it when you're in a long-term thing. You start thinking differently, you do things differently. And that's why I do what I do. I am not here trying to rain on anybody's parade. I'm trying to get you over an addiction. And sorry, from that perspective, I look at it as a compassionate anti-theist kind of thing. I want you to get past your addiction and start dealing with your life. Okay. And, I heard it last night, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. You just may not drink anymore. And I think that's true for me as a former religious person. I really feel like sometimes once a religious person, always a religious person. I just don't do the religious stuff anymore. And I try not to think the religious stuff. That's why deconversion is an issue. And apologists don't help when they keep doing stuff that is knowingly fallacious. It just makes it easy work for me to point out, hey, dude, that question has been answered by so-and-so. You need to deal with their answer, not keep postulating the same question. And when apologists don't listen to that, I'm done with you because you demonstrated to me that you're not really listening to the skeptics. You're just coming up with arguments to keep the faithful faithful. And I'm sorry, that's the real issue, isn't it? See, because I know the stats. I knew the stats 20 years ago when I was a Christian education director, that if we didn't do something back then in the 90s, we were going to watch Christianity fade from the American psyche to the point that it's irrelevant. This is exactly what's happened in Europe. And all of those societies are far more peaceful and better for it. Okay, that's why I do what I do. I'm trying to get you over your religion addiction so life is better for all of us. Okay, get past it. Sorry, this is why I end with, hopefully I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. Because that is the goal here. Because I'm not trying to say, you need to be up in people's face and screaming at them as an atheist. What I'm saying is, you need to get over the addiction you have to what belief systems tell you, because it is a very dangerous thing when they can manipulate your mind like that, and they can use the drug of religion. To me, it's the same. When they can use the drug of religion to manipulate you, it's no different than any other cult leader that uses sex or alcohol or drugs or whatever to manipulate their followers. It's the same stuff. The good parts of religion, pressing the buttons, with having an afterlife, having a purpose and all that stuff, yeah, it's right there. It's just right there. And that just stimulates the pleasure centers of the brain, and that's why you have good experiences. I saw this all the time in Pentecostalism. People were addicted to coming to the altar and having an emotional release. And that's just the truth of it. And, once I figured that out, that's when I stopped pretty much being a Pentecostal and started to be a more rational Christian. But as I began to realize, but the rational Christians still do the same thing on a lower level. They may not get as demonstrable about it, but their deep-seated inner emotions were the same. And apologists, getting back to the subject at hand, it seems to me don't really listen to the skeptics so much as they give the emotional response answers that are needed in Christians to keep being Christian. I don't think you're being apologists anymore. You're not giving a justification for the faith to skeptics. You're trying to give a justification for faith to the non-skeptic, to the person that believes, because you know that the arguments that the skeptics are giving are actually pretty solid. You just don't want to admit it. If you really want to be respectable and have atheists respect you, you have to learn to listen to what they're actually saying and deal with what they're actually saying. And this was my greatest frustration with apologists. They just don't listen very well. And it's a hard thing to talk to somebody that's not listening to you. Well, that's all it for my ramble today. And I'm going to end, like I said before, out of compassion, I say to you, hopefully I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. Get over your religion addiction and be a rabid atheist. And this is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.